There is one golden rule when handling a dangerous beast. Don't show fear. Fear is a scent. It coats your sweat, speeds up your pulse, and tells the creature in the room that you are nothing but prey. I make my living dealing with teeth, claws, and bad attitudes. I know how to lock my panic in a tight little box. I know how to use a firm voice and a cheap spray bottle to establish the pecking order. You can redirect almost any threat with the right toy. But nothing in my animal behavior textbooks prepared me for the king of the Lycans. If I knew the aggressive rescue dog waiting for me in a dark basement was a 300-pound prehistoric nightmare, I would have hung up the phone. I wouldn't have packed my livestock clippers. I wouldn't have brought the tearless berry shampoo. And I sure as hell wouldn't have shoved a neon orange squeaky bone between his snapping fangs. Rubber chew toys don't tame monsters. They trigger them. But hindsight is useless when your bank account hits zero. Sometimes you just have to grab your gear, ignore the warning signs, and step straight into the jaws of a trap. Chapter 1. The interior of the Pause and Reflect mobile grooming van smelled like wet asphalt, artificial coconut, and impending bankruptcy. Mack slammed the heavy steel drawer of her workstation shut. The metallic clatter masked the sound of the van's dying suspension, but it did nothing to block out her brother's groans. Leo slumped in the driver's seat, staring at a grease-smudged tablet. A bright red minus sign dominated the screen. They needed a miracle, or at least a client who didn't pay them in exposure. "We are ruined," Leo announced. He tossed the tablet onto the dashboard. "The transmission fluid is leaking. The generator needs a rebuilt carburetor, and Mrs. Gable canceled her Golden Doodles blowout because she said Mercury is in retrograde." "Mercury isn't retrograde for another 2 months," Mack said. She grabbed a bottle of blue barbicide and began sanitizing her shears. "She just doesn't want to pay the dematting fee. We need actual clients, people with money and dirty animals." Leo rubbed his face. "I'm going to start selling my organs. Do you think there's a market for a slightly anxious spleen?" Before Mack could suggest a career change, the burner phone mounted on the dashboard vibrated. It buzzed against the plastic console like an angry hornet. Leo snatched it up. He tapped the screen and pressed the phone to his ear. "Pause and reflect, where your best friend gets the royal treatment," Leo recited. He caught Mack's eye and rolled his own. "Yes, we handle large breeds. Mastiffs, Great Danes." "Wait, how big? Over 200 pounds? Sir, are you grooming a bear?" Mack stopped wiping her shears. A 200-pound dog meant specialized equipment. It also meant hazard pay. She pointed a metal comb at Leo and mouthed the word, money. Leo nodded frantic agreement. "Yes, we handle behavioral issues. My sister is a certified animal behaviorist. Biting? Growling? Property destruction? Listen, for the right price, we can groom a velociraptor." A long pause stretched through the van. The tinny voice on the other end murmured something brief. Leo's jaw dropped. His eyes widened to the size of hubcaps. $10,000? Leo choked out. He swallowed hard. Yes, sir. We can be there in an hour. Send the pin." He ended the call and stared at the dark screen. The silence inside the van felt heavier than the humidity outside. $10,000, Leo repeated, turning his head in increments to look at Mack. "Emergency gig, secluded estate up in the Blackwood Ridge area. The guy said it's an aggressive rescue dog. Massive, needs immediate de-skunking and a full groom." Mack put the shears down. 10 grand covered the van repairs, 3 months of rent, and left enough over for groceries that didn't come out of a cardboard box. But people didn't drop that kind of cash on a simple rescue dog unless the animal posed a significant risk to human life. "Aggressive," Mack repeated. "Did he specify the breed?" "He said mixed. He also asked if we had a non-disclosure agreement." Leo drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. "Mack, this feels shady. Like mob boss disposing of evidence shady." "I don't care if the dog belongs to an international cartel," Mack said. She opened the bottom cabinet of her workstation and pulled out a reinforced canvas duffel bag. For 10 grand, I will give the beast a pedicure and a bow. She started throwing gear into the bag. Standard clippers wouldn't cut it. She grabbed the heavy-duty, titanium-bladed trimmers used for livestock. She packed a heavy 2-gallon plastic jug of industrial de-skunking formula, a thick pair of Kevlar-lined bite gauntlets, and a heavy rope slip lead. He said it bites, Leo reminded her. He started the van's engine. It coughed, rattled, and finally hummed to life. Everything with teeth bites. Mack unlatched a plastic storage tub tucked beneath the sink. She dug past the pastel bandanas and standard tennis balls until her fingers closed around a thick, neon orange object. She pulled out a massive, heavy-duty rubber bone. The packaging claimed it could withstand the bite force of an adult crocodile. It had a reinforced squeaker buried deep inside the vulcanized rubber. Distraction and redirection, Mack muttered, tossing the neon orange toy into her duffel bag. If it snaps, I give it a target. Then I assert dominance. It's just a dog, Leo. Start driving. Leo threw the van into gear. Just a dog, right. If you get eaten, I get the 10 grand. Deal? Deal, Mack said, zipping the bag shut. The van lurched forward, rattling down the cracked pavement toward the mountains. Chapter 2. The wrought iron gates of the Blackwood Ridge estate loomed out of the fog like the jaws of a trap. No nameplates, no call buttons, just twisted black metal that swung open on silent hinges the moment the grooming van idled at the entrance. Leo gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning stark white. Mack, this is a villain's lair, a Bond villain, a Dracula villain. We are driving into the mouth of hell. Keep the speed under 10 miles per hour, Mack instructed. She checked the clip on her belt pouch, making sure her pet-safe pepper spray sat snug next to her training clicker. Rich people hate gravel displacement. The van crunched up a winding driveway flanked by ancient, twisting oaks. At the end of the drive sat a sprawling stone mansion that looked like it survived 3 wars and a plague. Standing on the sweeping front steps was a man wearing a bespoke suit that looked 2 days slept in. He had dark bags under his eyes and a posture that screamed exhaustion. As the van parked, he walked down the steps. He kept his hands clasped behind his back. Mack slid out of the passenger side, hefting her canvas duffel bag over one shoulder. She smoothed down her waterproof grooming apron. "You must be the pause and reflect team," the man said. His voice carried a raspy edge, like gravel grinding under a boot. "I am Silas. We spoke on the phone." "Mackenzie," Mack said. She extended a hand. Silas stared at her hand for a long moment before taking it. His grip felt like a steel vise, but his palm was slick with nervous sweat. "I need to be clear. The animal is difficult. He is currently contained in a reinforced holding room in the East Wing. He has destroyed 2 leather couches, a mahogany dining table, and snapped a steel chain. If you feel unsafe, you may leave. You will keep $1,000 for the travel inconvenience." Leo leaned out the driver's side window. "We'll take the 1,000. Mack shot her brother a glare that could freeze boiling water. "We are here for the full 10. Take me to the dog, Silas. I assume you have a water hookup down there?" Silas blinked. He looked at Mack's small frame, then at the heavy duffel bag. "We have a wash rack. Miss Mackenzie, I am not exaggerating the danger. He is feral right now." "I handle feral every Tuesday at the City Pound," Mack lied. She hefted the bag higher. "Lead the way." Silas sighed, a sound carrying the weight of a dying star. He turned and led her through the massive oak front doors. The interior of the mansion was vast, echoing, and smelled faintly of copper and damp earth. Deep gouges scarred the antique hardwood floors. The scratch marks looked less like a dog's nails and more like a bear had tried to dig to china. They walked down a long, dimly lit corridor that descended into the foundation of the house. At the end of the hall stood a heavy steel door. It looked like the entrance to a bank vault. Silas stopped in front of it. He did not touch the heavy iron handle. "He is inside," Silas murmured. He took a step back, giving the door a wide berth. The wash basin is on the left. Drains are built into the floor. Good luck." Mack set her bag down. She rolled her shoulders back. Fear was a scent. Animals could smell cortisol and adrenaline. She locked her emotions into a tight, clinical box. She wasn't a prey item, she was the alpha in this interaction. She gripped the iron handle, shoved the heavy door open, and stepped inside. The room was vast, lined with concrete and smelling of wet fur, mud, and raw aggression. Shadows pooled in the corners. Low, rhythmic panting echoed off the walls. In the darkest corner of the room, a massive shape shifted. Mack's breath hitched. The creature wasn't a dog, it was a nightmare. It stood on 4 legs, but its shoulders rose past her waist. Coarse, midnight-colored fur bristled along a spine made of pure muscle. Eyes the color of molten gold locked onto her from the darkness. A low growl vibrated through the concrete floor, rattling the soles of Mack's boots. It stepped into the dim light. The sheer mass of the beast defied logic. It looked like a prehistoric wolf. The beast bared teeth that belonged in a shark's mouth. It lowered its massive head, preparing to lunge and tear the intruder apart. Mack didn't run. She didn't scream. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the plastic training clicker, and pressed her thumb down. Click-clack! The sharp, metallic noise snapped through the room. The beast flinched, its ears flicking back in sheer confusion. Mack pointed a single, unwavering finger at the concrete floor. "No," she commanded. Her voice held the sharp, ringing authority of a drill sergeant. "Sit!" Chapter 3. Intruder, Threat, Kill. The feral voice of the beast roared through Kaylin's mind, drowning out all rational thought. The curse locked him in this form, burning his veins with unyielding rage. He wanted to tear the steel door off its hinges. He wanted to hunt. Then the small human female stepped into his territory. The beast tasted the air. Human, fragile, weak, bite the throat. Kaylin's muscles bunched. He prepared to launch his massive weight across the room and pin the intruder to the concrete. He bared his fangs, letting a bone-rattling growl tear from his chest. This was the king's domain. No one entered without yielding. Click-clack. The sharp, artificial noise struck Kaylin's ears like a physical blow. The beast paused. "What is that sound?" "No," the human barked. "Sit!" The command carried no fear. There was no spike of adrenaline in her scent, no stench of terror. She smelled like cheap coconut and absolute authority. The sheer audacity of this tiny, squishy creature commanding the Lycan king short-circuited the beast's predatory drive. Does she not see the teeth? The beast wondered. Why is she not running? Before Kaylin could process the absurdity of the situation, the human turned her back on him. She casually walked over to a coiled industrial hose attached to the wall. She twisted a brass valve. Water hissed, spraying onto the sloped concrete floor. "Come here," Mack said. She didn't look back. She busied herself unzipping a canvas bag. The beast growled again, louder this time. He took a heavy step forward, intent on reminding her of her place on the food chain. Mack spun around. She held the nozzle of the hose. Without a second of hesitation, she squeezed the trigger. A blast of cold water hit Kaylin square in the snout. The Lycan king let out a shocked, undignified wheeze. He stumbled backward, his massive paws slipping on the wet concrete. He shook his massive head, water flying from his coarse fur. "Attack!" the beast demanded. Kaylin lunged, snapping his jaws at the hose. Click-clack. Mack fired the clicker right next to his ear. As he flinched from the noise, she stepped straight into his personal space. She didn't back away. She pressed her hand flat against his massive chest, shoving him back toward the center of the drain. Mack scolded. She sounded annoyed, not terrified. "We do not bite the hose. Bad manners." The beast froze. A human hand touched his chest. She wasn't trembling. She was treating him like an unruly pup. The ancient, terrifying wolf inside Kaylin's mind felt a strange, jarring sensation. It wasn't anger. It was humiliation. Mack didn't give him time to recover. She soaked his thick coat from neck to tail, ignoring the deep, rumbling growls that vibrated beneath her hands. "You are a disaster," Mack muttered. She reached into her apron and pulled out a massive, hot pink plastic bottle. She popped the cap. A sickeningly sweet scent flooded the room. It smelled like artificial strawberries and bubble gum. Mack squirted a massive glob of the pink gel onto Kaylin's shoulders. She dug her fingers deep into his thick coat, scrubbing with ruthless efficiency. The coarse fur began to lather. Thick, pink, berry-scented bubbles blossomed across the Lycan King's muscular back. "This is a disgrace," Kaylin thought. "I am the king of the Blackwood Pack. I command armies. I am covered in pink foam." The beast in his head whined. The scrubbing actually felt quite nice. Her fingers dug into the tight muscles along his spine, relieving tension he didn't know he carried. "No, we are feral. We must bite," the beast argued, though the demand lacked its earlier conviction. Kaylin let out a menacing snarl to reestablish his dominance. He snapped his jaws inches from her arm, ensuring she heard the fatal click of his teeth. Mack didn't even blink. She scooped up a handful of pink suds and slapped it directly onto the top of his head. She fashioned his wet fur into a ridiculous, soapy mohawk. "If you bite me, the grooming stops and the muzzle goes on," Mack warned. She pointed a soapy finger right at his nose. "Do you want the muzzle?" The beast stared cross-eyed at the pink suds dripping down its snout. It sat down, hard. "We do not want the muzzle," the beast decided. Mack nodded. "Good boy." She grabbed the hose and began rinsing the foam away. Kaylin sat completely still in the center of the drain, stripped of his dignity, smelling of summer berries, and utterly captivated by the fearless human woman. Chapter 4. The uneasy truce lasted through the blow-dry phase. Mack used a high-velocity industrial dryer to blast the water from the massive wolf's coat. The machine roared like a jet engine. The beast endured it with narrowed eyes, sitting rigidly on the concrete floor. His coat was magnificent. Stripped of the mud and grime, the dark fur gleamed with an almost metallic sheen. Underneath the fur, thick ropes of muscle shifted with every breath. He was anatomically bizarre for a canine, too broad in the chest and too heavy in the forelegs. But Mack kept those analytical thoughts locked away. Job first, biology questions later. She clicked the dryer off. The sudden silence in the reinforced room felt heavy. "All right, big guy," Mack said. She clipped the dryer hose back onto the wall. "Time for the feet. You have talons, not nails. You're scratching up the nice man's floors." She walked over to her canvas bag and pulled out the heavy-duty titanium-bladed livestock clippers. They looked like bolt cutters. The moment the beast saw the metal tool, his demeanor changed. The relaxed posture vanished, his ears pinned flat against his skull. The rumbling growl started low in his chest, vibrating through the floorboards. Metal, blades, threat. The beast's instincts surged to the surface. He would not be bound or cut. Mack approached him, keeping her posture relaxed but authoritative. "Give me the paw." The wolf bared his teeth, curling his upper lip to expose fangs the size of hunting knives. The growl escalated into a terrifying snarl. He shifted his weight, preparing to strike. Mack recognized the body language. He wasn't bluffing anymore. The metal triggered a hard boundary. He was going to bite. Most people would drop the clippers and run. Mack knew running triggered prey drive. Instead, she dropped the clippers into her apron pocket and reached blindly into her canvas bag. Her fingers brushed past the brushes and combs until she found the thick, vulcanized rubber. The wolf lunged. His massive jaws snapped forward, aiming for her hand. Mack moved with practiced precision. She thrust the heavy-duty neon-orange squeaky bone directly into his open mouth. The wolf's jaws clamped down on the thick rubber instead of flesh. "Squeak!" The absurd, high-pitched noise echoed through the concrete room. The wolf froze. His golden eyes crossed slightly as he stared down at the bright orange object wedged between his terrifying teeth. Squeak! The sound broke something fundamental in the air. A visceral, cracking noise echoed off the walls. The shadows in the room seemed to twist and stretch. Mack stumbled back as the massive wolf's form began to warp. Bone shifted, muscle contorted, fur retracted into skin. The transformation happened in a violent, impossible blur of motion. Mack hit the concrete wall, her breath leaving her lungs in a sharp gasp. Where the prehistoric wolf just stood, a man now knelt on the damp floor. He was massive, easily 6'4", with broad shoulders and scars cutting across a chest carved from granite. Dark hair fell over a sharp, aristocratic face. His eyes still burned with that same molten gold fire. He was also completely, undeniably naked. The man slowly stood up. He dwarfed the room. He reached up, grasped the neon-orange squeaky bone still wedged in his mouth, and pulled it free. He looked at the ridiculous toy. Then he looked at Mack. With a slow, deliberate movement, he clamped his massive hand around the vulcanized rubber. His knuckles turned white. With a sharp twist and a terrifying display of raw strength, he ripped the indestructible crocodile-proof toy clean in half. He tossed the ruined rubber pieces onto the wet floor. He took a slow step toward Mack. The golden eyes pinned her in place. "Squeak for me," Kaelin growled, his voice a dark velvet rumble that sent a shiver straight down her spine. Mack's brain flatlined. Logic failed. Science burned to ash. A giant wolf just turned into a naked Greek god who ruined her $20 heavy-duty chew toy. Panic threatened to choke her, but the clinical box in her mind slammed shut, locking the terror inside. Survival meant maintaining dominance. Mack didn't scream. She reached down, grabbed a large, dry microfiber towel from her bag, and threw it directly at his face. The towel smacked into his nose and cascaded down his chest, landing perfectly across his waist. Kaelin caught the fabric out of pure reflex, looking thoroughly baffled by the projectile laundry. "Put that on," Mack snapped, her voice cracking only slightly. She grabbed her heavy canvas bag and hoisted it over her shoulder. She pointed a shaking finger at the ruined pieces of neon-orange rubber on the floor. "And I am charging you a $40 property damage fee for the bone. Good day." She turned on her heel, pushed open the heavy iron door, and marched out of the room before her knees could give out. Chapter 5. Mack pushed the heavy steel vault door shut. The latch engaged with a resounding clack, sealing the nightmare inside the basement. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she kept her face an unreadable mask. She gripped the straps of her heavy canvas duffel bag, marched down the dimly lit corridor, and took the stairs 2 at a time. Silas waited in the grand foyer. He opened his mouth to speak, his exhausted eyes scanning her for bite marks. Mack held up a single imperious finger. She bypassed the beta, shoved the massive oak front doors open, and stomped down the stone steps. Leo sat in the driver's seat of the Pause and Reflect van, drumming his fingers against the plastic steering wheel. Mack yanked the passenger door open and hurled her duffel bag onto the floorboards. She climbed into the seat, chest heaving. Before Leo could ask a question, a loud metallic thud echoed from the back of the van. Leo jumped. He slid the plastic partition window open, peering into the back cargo area. The rear cargo doors had been violently yanked open. Standing in the gravel driveway, framed by the twisted oaks, was a massive, stark-naked man with molten gold eyes. He clutched a damp microfiber towel against his waist, having clearly ripped the basement vault's steel locking mechanism straight out of the concrete to follow her. He glared at the van with an intensity that promised violence and obsession. Leo stared at the man. The man stared at Leo. "Nope," Leo croaked. "Above my pay grade." Leo slammed the partition window shut. He threw the van into drive, slammed his foot on the gas pedal, and sent the rusted vehicle careening down the driveway. Gravel showered the manicured lawns. Mack lunged into the back, desperately grabbing the heavy cargo doors and yanking them shut against the van's forward momentum just before they swerved onto the main road, leaving the Gothic estate behind in a cloud of dust. They drove for 15 minutes in dead silence. The scent of artificial coconut air freshener warred with the stench of Mack's nervous sweat. Leo pulled into a desolate gas station, parking under the harsh glare of a flickering fluorescent canopy light. He shifted into park and hit the manual door locks. "Okay," Leo breathed, gripping the steering wheel. "Talk." "I washed a prehistoric wolf," Mack stated, her voice flat. "It lunged at me. I shoved a crocodile-proof squeaky bone into its mouth. It transformed into a man. He broke the bone in half, then he told me to squeak for him." Leo did not laugh. He did not dismiss her. He reached for his burner phone, opened a browser, and typed frantic keystrokes. "Right, okay, shapeshifters, skinwalkers, lycanthropy. We need rules. Silver bullets? Wolfsbane? Full moons?" Mack reached into her apron pocket and retrieved her clinical clipboard. She clicked her pen. "Forget the mythology, Leo. Focus on the biology. The wolf weighed easily 350 pounds. The man weighed maybe 220. Where did the extra mass go? You cannot violate the law of conservation of mass. Did his bone density compress? Did his cellular structure fold?" "You want to discuss physics?" Leo tapped his phone screen. "Mack, we just met a werewolf." "I want to understand the threat," Mack countered, scribbling notes on her legal pad. "He shifted in seconds. The caloric burn required for cellular metamorphosis of that scale would kill a normal organism. He must have a hyper-accelerated metabolism. And his eyes, they stayed gold, a genetic marker." Back at the Blackwood estate, Kalen had retreated from the empty driveway and descended back into the holding room. He stood in the center of the wet concrete floor. The scent of the human woman lingered in the damp air, a mix of vanilla and sheer audacity. He looked down at the two halves of the ruined neon-orange rubber toy near his bare feet. "Mine," the ancient beast roared inside his skull. "Mate." "She is a groomer," Kalen replied, gripping the towel tighter. "She sprayed me with a hose." "She knows commands. She has no fear," the beast countered, a feral purr vibrating through Kalen's chest. "Mate went in the white box on wheels. Chase. Fetch mate. Bring her back." Kalen closed his eyes. The curse usually demanded blood and dominance. Now it demanded he track down a rundown commercial van and submit to a tiny human wielding a plastic clicker. The indignity burned, but the pull of the bond anchored deep in his chest. He needed a suit, and he needed her address. Chapter 6. The mid-morning sun beat down on the suburban dog park. Mack stood outside the van, finishing a sanitary trim on a squirming, fluffy white poodle. She kept her posture relaxed, but her eyes constantly scanned the perimeter. You do not blindside an apex predator, and she assumed an apex predator would extend the same courtesy. She miscalculated. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb, dwarfing her rusted grooming van. Silas stepped out first, looking even more ragged than yesterday. He opened the rear door. Kalen emerged. He wore a custom charcoal gray suit that strained across his broad shoulders and thick chest. The man looked like a billionaire warlord. A faint, ridiculous trace of bubblegum shampoo clung to his dark hair. Leo spotted them from the driver's seat. He grabbed a heavy metal wrench from the console and gripped it tight. Mack did not run. Running triggered the chase instinct. She handed the pristine poodle back to its owner, accepted a wad of cash, and wiped her titanium clippers clean with a sanitized towel. She turned to face the Lycan king. "Miss Mackenzie," Silas started, offering a placating gesture. Mack pointed her metal comb toward a green wooden park bench. "Sit." Kalen's jaw tightened. The beast in his head let out a happy yip, thrilled by her authoritative tone. Kalen marched over to the bench and sat down, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked like a storm cloud stuffed into tailored wool. Mack grabbed her clipboard, marched over, and stood right in front of him. I have questions. You will answer them, or my brother drives this van to the next state. You cannot run from me, Kalen rumbled, his golden eyes locked onto hers. You are my mate. Define mate, Mack demanded, clicking her pen. Is this a conscious socio-political partnership, or a biological imperative driven by pheromones and a hyperactive amygdala? Because if it is just a chemical imbalance, I can recommend a board-certified endocrinologist. Kalen blinked. His imposing glare faltered. Decades of ruling the Lycan courts prepared him for violence, assassinations, and territorial disputes. Nobody had ever offered him a doctor for his soul bond. It is destiny, Kalen growled, leaning forward. The joining of two souls. Souls lack empirical evidence, Mack shot back, scribbling on her pad. Let us talk mass displacement. You weighed 350 pounds as a wolf. You weigh 220 now. Where does the extra 130 pounds of biological mass come from? Are you pulling matter from another dimension? Kalen stared at her clipboard. I do not know. You do not know? Mack raised an eyebrow. It is your body. The shift happens, Kalen gritted out, frustration bleeding into his tone. It is ancient magic, not a science experiment. Everything is science, Mack corrected. She tapped her pen against the paper. What is your cellular decay rate? If we are fated, I need to know your lifespan. Will I be changing your adult diapers in 60 years while you still look 30? Or do you age at a standard human trajectory? Mate is smart, the beast howled in Kalen's mind. Mate knows words. Bark for mate. Kalen ignored the wolf. He found himself staring at the ink smudges on her fingers. Her intellect formed a barrier thicker than steel armor. She felt no awe, only analytical curiosity. The sheer competence of her interrogation sent a hot spike of arousal straight to his core. Lycan lifespans span centuries, Kalen answered, his voice dropping an octave. I heal rapidly. I require a high caloric intake. Noted, Mack said, drawing a harsh line under her notes. Next question. If I used a chocolate-scented shampoo yesterday, would that have induced toxicosis? Do you suffer from canine ailments? Do I need to worry about heartworm? Kalen let out a low, dangerous laugh. It rumbled in his chest, vibrating through the wood of the park bench. I am the king of the Blackwoods, Mackenzie. A tick will not fell me. Good to know, Mack replied, turning a page. Now let us discuss your boundary issues. Chapter 7. While Mack subjected the Lycan king to a rigorous biological cross-examination, Leo slid out of the van. He kept the heavy wrench tucked discreetly against his leg. He approached Silas, who leaned heavily against the black town car, massaging his temples. Hey, Beta, Leo called out. Silas cracked one eye open. Mr. Leo, please tell me your sister intends to accept the bond. The king tore the bumper off a garbage truck this morning because it smelled like her engine exhaust. We are practical people, Silas, Leo said, leaning against the town car. He pulled a battered tablet from his pocket. Let us talk operations. If this giant werewolf guy intends to insert himself into our lives, Pause and Reflect needs a serious contract restructuring. Silas sighed, reaching into his suit jacket. The Blackwood Treasury holds immense wealth. Name your price. It is not just about the money, Leo corrected, tapping his screen. It is about liability. If your boss shifts inside my van and ruins the new suspension I plan to buy, does supernatural damage fall under standard commercial auto insurance? Or is this an act of God situation? Wait, act of dog? Silas rubbed his face with both hands. The pack will cover all property damage. In writing, Leo demanded. He opened a spreadsheet. Next issue, grooming hazards. We handle dangerous breeds, but we need to know his triggers. Does he shed out of season? Do we need specialized equipment? We use titanium blades, but I read on a forum last night that werewolves hate silver. Should I order silver-plated combs for crowd control? Silas's eyes snapped wide open. Panic flooded his exhausted features. He lunged forward, grabbing Leo by the shoulders. His grip felt like a hydraulic press. "No silver," Silas hissed, his voice trembling with genuine terror. "Never silver. It sears Lycan flesh. It poisons the blood. If you bring silver near the king, his guards will execute you before you can blink. No silver in the van." Leo swallowed hard, his bravado slipping for a second. He nodded, tapping his tablet with a shaky finger. "Noted. 0 silver. Titanium and steel only." Silas released him, stepping back and straightening his tie. "Good. We also require exclusive access to your services. A monthly retainer." "Double our standard emergency rate," Leo countered, his business sense returning. "Plus a hazard fee, a non-disclosure fee, and reimbursement for the crocodile-proof squeaky bone he destroyed." "Done," Silas agreed instantly. He pulled a sleek black phone from his pocket and tapped the screen. A moment later, Leo's burner phone chimed with a bank notification. Leo glanced at the screen and nearly dropped the wrench. The number had 5 zeros. A few feet away, Kalen sat on the park bench, his massive frame perfectly still as Mack lectured him about personal space boundaries. "Look at her," Kalen thought, feeling a strange warmth bloom in his chest. "She commands the air around her." "Mate has clipboard," the beast agreed, a mental tail wagging furiously in the back of his mind. "Mate tells us what to do. We like Mate." Kalen did not disagree. He watched Mack cap her pen and slide the clipboard back into her apron. She looked at him with sharp, intelligent eyes, devoid of the sycophantic worship he received at the Lycan court. "We have an understanding?" Mack asked, crossing her arms. "We do," Kalen lied. He had zero intention of following her rules, but he enjoyed the sound of her voice too much to argue. Leo walked over, pocketing his tablet. "Mack, the retainer cleared. We are officially on the Blackwood payroll." "Excellent," Mack said. She turned to Kalen. "Since you are no longer a client, you need to leave. I have a 3 o'clock appointment with a golden retriever across town." Kalen stood up. He smoothed his suit jacket. "I go where you go. I will accompany you to this appointment." Chapter 8. Mack stood in the doorway of the grooming van, blocking the entrance with her body. She glared up at the 6'4" mountain of Lycan King currently trying to bypass her. "No," Mack commanded. "My van, my workspace. You stay in your luxury sedan." "I am the king," Kalen stated, his deep voice brokering no argument. "I protect what is mine. You are entering unknown territory. I will guard the perimeter." "It is a gated community in the suburbs," Mack deadpanned. "The biggest threat is a rogue HOA president. You are taking up too much space. Get out." "Tell Mate we stay," the beast growled, pacing circles in Kalen's mind. "We sit in the white box. We guard the clippers." Kalen ignored her command. He moved with impossible speed, slipping past her guard and stepping into the passenger side of the rusted van. He dropped his massive frame into the cracked vinyl seat. His broad shoulders spanned the entire width of the window. His knees hit the plastic dashboard. He looked like a grizzly bear folded into a clown car. Mack let out a sharp breath of pure frustration. She slammed the side door shut, walked around to the back, and climbed into her grooming station. "Leo," Mack called out through the partition. "Drive! Let the stalker rot his knees." Leo started the engine. The van rattled and coughed, spewing a cloud of exhaust before lurching down the street. Kalen sat perfectly rigid in the front seat. The scent of wet asphalt and coconut oil assaulted his enhanced senses, mingling with the faint trace of berry shampoo still clinging to his own hair. It was sensory torture, but the proximity to his mate anchored his feral instincts. They arrived at a sprawling suburban house with a manicured lawn. Mack grabbed her slip lead and marched up to the front door. She returned a few minutes later leading Barnaby, a massive, overly friendly golden retriever. Barnaby trotted toward the van, tail wagging, tongue lolling out of his mouth. He loved the grooming van. He loved the treats. Then Barnaby looked at the passenger window. Kalen turned his head. His golden eyes locked onto the retriever. He did not growl. He did not move. He simply radiated the terrifying, oppressive aura of an apex predator sitting at the top of the food chain. Barnaby froze, his tail tucked tight between his hind legs. He let out a high-pitched whimper and immediately emptied his bladder onto Mrs. Higgins' pristine concrete driveway. "Hey!" Mack shouted. She yanked the passenger door open. "Stop intimidating the clients." "I did nothing," Kalen defended, looking genuinely offended. "I merely looked at the creature." "Eat the yellow dog," the beast demanded, snapping its jaws in Kalen's mind. "Yellow dog smells like fear. Bite its neck." "We do not eat the clients," Kalen commanded his wolf. "Silence yourself." "Your eyes are glowing," Mack scolded. She grabbed a roll of paper towels from the back and tossed them at Kalen's chest. "You are disrupting my business model. Stop making eye contact with the animals. Look at the floor. Look at your shoes. If you scare this dog again, I will get the spray bottle." Kalen caught the paper towels. The king of the Blackwood Pack, a warrior who ended bloodlines and shattered armies, sat in the vinyl seat of a dying van and stared obediently at his expensive leather shoes. "Better," Mack muttered. She coaxed a trembling Barnaby into the back of the van, lifting the heavy dog onto the hydraulic table. Leo watched the entire exchange from the driver's seat. He slowly reached over and adjusted the rearview mirror, ensuring he kept a clear line of sight on Kalen. "So," Leo whispered to Kalen, keeping his voice low so Mack wouldn't hear over the sound of the running water. "Do you guys have taxes? Because if I am auditing the pack treasury, I need to know your deductible status." Kalen kept his eyes fixed on his shoes. "Speak to Silas. I am guarding the perimeter." Chapter 9. The rusted suspension of the pause and reflect van groaned a pitiful metallic complaint. Kalen's sheer mass compressed the passenger side shocks to their absolute limit. He sat in the cracked vinyl seat, his broad shoulders dwarfing the dashboard. His custom charcoal gray suit jacket strained at the seams every time he took a breath. A lingering scent of artificial bubblegum shampoo mingled with the van's baked-in odor of wet asphalt and coconut oil. Mack stood in the cargo area, hands resting on her hips over her waterproof grooming apron. The hydraulic table sat empty. Outside, the midday sun baked the suburban pavement. "If you insist on occupying my workspace, you need to earn your keep," Mack stated. She tapped her clinical clipboard against the steel partition. "I am not running a sightseeing tour. You are taking up valuable real estate." Kalen turned his head. His molten gold eyes locked onto her face. "I am guarding the perimeter. My presence ensures your safety." "The biggest threat in this neighborhood is an unbagged yard clipping," Mack countered. "Get in the back." Kalen's jaw clenched. The king of the Blackwood Pack did not take orders. He gave them. He conquered territories and shattered enemies. "Mate wants us in the back," the beast rumbled in his mind, a mental tail thumping against his skull. "Go to mate. Obey the clipboard." Kalen ignored the traitorous wolf. He stepped over the center console, contorting his massive frame to fit through the narrow partition door. He stood in the grooming area, his head brushing the metal ceiling. They had driven to their next appointment, and Silas's black town car had dutifully followed them to the new curb. Mack unlatched a small travel crate. She reached inside and pulled out a trembling 3-pound Pomeranian named Muffin. Muffin resembled a toasted marshmallow with anxiety issues. "Hold the dog," Mack ordered, holding the fluff ball out toward the Lycan king. Kalen stared at the tiny canine. "That is not a wolf. That is a rodent." "She is a client. Hold her." Mack shoved the Pomeranian into Kalen's chest. Reflex forced Kalen to catch the creature. His massive hands, scarred from centuries of brutal combat, enveloped the tiny dog. Muffin froze, sensing the apex predator holding her. Then she let out a pathetic squeak and buried her face into the lapel of Kaylin's tailored charcoal suit. "Keep her still," Mack instructed. She reached into her belt pouch, bypassing the pet-safe pepper spray, and withdrew a pair of titanium-bladed nail clippers. "I need to trim the dew claws. If she squirms, I might cut the quick." Kaylin stood rigid in the center of the rusted van. Dog hair immediately clung to his expensive wool trousers. The Pomeranian trembled against his sternum. Outside the open rear cargo doors, Silas leaned against the black town car. The exhausted Beta gripped a lukewarm coffee cup. His tired eyes widened as he watched his king, a legendary warlord, cradle a 3-pound puffball while a human woman clipped its tiny nails. Silas rubbed his face, wondering if he had finally suffered a stress-induced stroke. "You are tense," Mack noted, not looking up from Muffin's paws. "Your heart rate is elevating. Animals sense tension. Relax your shoulders." "I am relaxed," Kaylin gritted through his teeth. "Squeeze the fluff," the beast suggested. "We do not squeeze the fluff," Kaylin snapped back. "We endure." From the driver's seat, Leo watched the mirror. He tapped his tablet screen, double-checking the 50 bank transfer from the Blackwood Treasury. "Hey, Silas," Leo yelled out the window. "Does the retainer cover dry cleaning? Because your boss is getting a lot of dander on that suit." Silas gave a weak thumbs up, too defeated to speak. Mack finished the final paw and clicked the titanium trimmers shut. "Done. Put her down." Kaylin placed Muffin on the hydraulic table. He brushed a clump of orange fur off his sleeve. He looked ridiculous. He felt ridiculous. But as Mack offered him a brief, approving nod, a strange sense of accomplishment settled in his chest. Chapter 10. The air conditioning in the van wheezed, blowing lukewarm air across Mack's face. She finished tying a pastel pink bandana around Muffin's neck and handed the Pomeranian back to a grateful owner on the sidewalk. She accepted a $20 tip, waited for the owner to safely retreat inside their house, and turned back to the van. "Laundry duty," Mack announced. She gathered a pile of damp, fur-covered pink towels from the floor. She shoved the stack into Kaylin's chest. "Take these to the bin next to the town car. Do not drop them in the dirt." Kaylin gripped the stack of pink towels. He stepped out of the rusted van, his charcoal suit wrinkled and covered in orange dog hair. He walked toward Silas and the town car. A sleek, slate-gray sports car turned the corner, its engine letting out a throaty roar. It screeched to a halt right behind the grooming van, blocking Silas's exit. The driver's door swung open. A man stepped onto the asphalt. He wore a pristine designer suit and an arrogant sneer. Corvin, a minor noble from the Eastern Territories, possessed wealth, ambition, and a complete lack of common sense. He tracked the king's scent, expecting to find Kaylin hunting rogue vampires or securing borders. Instead, Corvin found the Lycan king holding a stack of dirty pink dog towels outside a rusted van smelling of coconut oil. Corvin let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "My king, word reached the eastern borders that you claimed a human groomer. We thought it a jest. Yet here you stand, playing the role of a maid." Silas dropped his coffee cup. The plastic shattered. Brown liquid pooled on the concrete. "Lord Corvin, step back into your vehicle." "Silence, Beta," Corvin spat. He stalked toward Kaylin, his eyes flashing a vibrant, dangerous amber. "The council bleats about tradition, but this is a disgrace. The king of the Blackwoods, carrying rags for a human." Kaylin stopped walking. He did not drop the towels. His posture shifted, an imperceptible tightening of muscle and bone. His molten gold eyes flared, burning through the suburban sunlight. "Threat!" the beast roared, shattering the domestic calm. "Kill the insolent pup! Tear his throat!" "Leave this street, Corvin," Kaylin rumbled, his voice dropping to a gravelly octave that vibrated the windows of the sports car. "Before I break your spine." Corvin sneered. "You are weak, tamed by a fragile human. I challenge your right to lead the Blackwood pack." Inside the van, Mack paused, wiping down her titanium shears. A challenge. She understood pack dynamics. Wolves established hierarchy through violence. She also understood municipal law. A werewolf fight in a residential zone meant SWAT teams, animal control, and the revocation of her business license. "Where does the mass come from?" Mack muttered under her breath, watching through the back doors. Corvin did not wait for Kaelin to drop the towels. The noble threw his head back, his designer suit shredded as bones cracked and lengthened. Muscles bulged, tearing through silk and wool. In seconds, a massive, russet-colored wolf stood on the asphalt, snarling at the king. Kaelin dropped the pink towels. He cracked his neck, letting the beast rise to the surface. He prepared to shift, ready to paint the pristine concrete with Corvin's blood. Mack did not scream. She did not cower. She unclipped the metal canister from her belt pouch. Chapter 11. Corvin's massive, russet wolf form gathered its hind legs, digging sharp claws into the asphalt. He lunged, a blur of muscle and fangs aimed directly at Kaelin's throat. Kaelin stood his ground. His molten gold eyes glowed brighter. He welcomed the violence. He welcomed the blood. Mack moved faster. She recognized the biomechanics of a canine strike. She calculated the trajectory, the wind direction, and the potential property damage. She stepped out of the back of the rusted van, positioning herself squarely between the charging wolf and the Lycan king. "Mackenzie, move!" Kaelin bellowed, his human voice cracking with primal panic. Mack did not flinch. She raised her right arm, aiming the professional-grade, pet-safe pepper spray canister directly at the russet wolf's snout. She pressed the trigger. A thick, concentrated cone of bright orange mist erupted from the nozzle. The chemical payload consisted of pure, concentrated capsaicinoids. The spray hit Corvin midair, coating his sensitive nose, eyes, and mouth. Lycanthropy offered accelerated healing, immense strength, and a lifespan spanning centuries. It also granted a sense of smell 10,000 times more sensitive than a human's. Corvin hit the asphalt like a dropped anvil. The russet wolf let out a high-pitched, agonizing shriek that sounded more like a tea kettle than a predator. He slammed his front paws over his snout, rolling on the concrete. The capsaicin bound directly to his pain receptors, sending waves of pure fire through his hypersensitive olfactory nerves. "Achoo!" Corvin sneezed, a massive, wet sound that expelled orange mist into the air. He whined, thrashing his massive body against the side of the silver sports car, leaving a dent in the driver's door. Kaelin froze. The beast in his head halted its bloodthirsty rampage, staring in sheer bewilderment at the incapacitated challenger. Mack lowered the canister. She clicked the safety mechanism back into place and hooked it onto her apron belt. She pulled her clinical clipboard from her pocket and clicked her pen. "Fascinating," Mack murmured, jotting down notes. "The capsaicin bypasses the cellular regeneration factor entirely. The hypersensitive mucous membranes exacerbate the inflammatory response. He is completely neutralized." Silas stood frozen by the black town car, his mouth hanging open. He looked at the crying, sneezing wolf, then at the human woman scribbling on a clipboard. Inside the van, Leo leaned out the driver's window. He held his phone up, recording the entire incident. "Hey, Silas, does your supernatural insurance cover chemical warfare? Because I am not paying for the dent in that sports car." Corvin continued to writhe on the ground, his sneezes rattling his massive rib cage. Tears streamed from his amber eyes, matting his russet fur. The terrifying challenge dissolved into a pathetic display of allergies and pain. Kaelin stared at Mack. The human woman possessed no claws, no fangs, and no magic. Yet, with a flick of her thumb, she brought a Lycan noble to his knees. The beast in his mind did not feel robbed of a kill. It felt awe. "Mate is the strongest," the beast concluded, a mental howl of pure adoration echoing in Kalen's skull. Mate defeats enemies with orange cloud. Bow to mate. Mack tapped her pen against the paper. She looked down at Corvin. Do not rub your eyes. It drives the oils deeper into the tissue. We have a neutralizer in the van, but I charge $100 for an emergency eye flush. Chapter 12. The russet wolf let out one final pathetic sneeze. The transformation triggered in reverse, driven by sheer panic and the desperate need to rub his eyes with human hands. Bones snapped and reformed, skin replaced fur. Corvin lay naked on the asphalt, curled in a fetal position. He clawed at his face, his skin flushed bright red from the pepper spray. He sobbed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed down the quiet suburban street. Silas finally moved. The beta opened the trunk of the black town car, pulled out a spare wool blanket, and threw it over the weeping noble's shivering form. Kalen stepped forward. The awe faded, replaced by cold, lethal alpha energy. He loomed over the incapacitated noble. His charcoal suit, though covered in Pomeranian hair, did nothing to diminish his terrifying presence. You challenged the throne, Kalen rumbled, his voice devoid of mercy. You insulted my pack. You bled on a public street, risking exposure. The punishment for treason is death. Corvin whimpered under the wool blanket, rubbing his swollen eyes. Mercy, my king. The fire. My face burns. You do not ask me for mercy, Kalen growled. He pointed a massive finger at Mack, who stood calmly by the van, wiping her canister with a sanitized wipe. You insulted her. Apologize to my mate. Mack stopped wiping the canister. She tucked the cloth into her apron pocket and pulled out her clipboard. She tapped the plastic end of her pen against the metal clip. Independent contractor, Mack corrected, her tone sharp and professional. Kalen closed his eyes. He let out a long, slow breath, counting to 10 in ancient Sumerian. Mackenzie, we discussed this. We discussed a retainer fee, Mack replied, flipping a page on her clipboard. A mate implies a legal and binding domestic partnership. I have not reviewed the tax implications of a supernatural marriage. Furthermore, my business license classifies me as a sole proprietor. Therefore, I am an independent contractor. Corvin peered out from under the blanket, his eyes red and streaming. He looked at the terrifying king, then at the human woman lecturing him on tax law. I apologize to the independent contractor. Apology accepted, Mack said, making a check mark on her paper. She turned to Kalen. Load the pink towels into the back. We have a golden doodle appointment in 20 minutes across town. If we are late, we lose the deposit. Kalen stared at her. The king of the Blackwoods, a creature of nightmare and legend, bent down and picked up the pile of dirty pink towels from the asphalt. He tossed them into the cargo bin of the rusted van. Get in the car, Corvin, Silas muttered, hauling the weeping noble to his feet. Before she decides to use the clicker on you. Leo slapped his hand against the side of the van. Let's roll, people! Time is money! Kalen approached the passenger side of the Pause and Reflect van. He opened the creaking door, folded his massive frame into the cracked vinyl seat, and slammed the door shut. He smelled like bubblegum and dog hair. His inner wolf hummed with absolute contentment. Mack climbed into the back, securing her tools. Leo shifted the van into drive. The dying suspension groaned, the tires squeaked against the asphalt, and they drove away, leaving a weeping Lycan noble in their rearview mirror. Chapter 13. The rusted Pause and Reflect van rattled down the suburban street, leaving a freshly groomed, deposit-saving golden doodle behind them. Kalen sat in the passenger seat. His charcoal gray custom suit, once a masterpiece of tailoring, now resembled a felted rug woven from orange Pomeranian fur and golden doodle dander. He did not care. The beast in his head hummed a steady rhythm of absolute satisfaction. His mate commanded the environment. She defeated challengers. She dictated the schedule. They reached the edge of the city limits, where the concrete faded into dense forest roads. Mack put the van in park outside a deserted gas station. She turned to the Lycan king, her waterproof apron crinkling. "End of shift," Mack stated. She tapped her clinical clipboard against the steering column. "I have supply inventory tonight. You need to return to your gothic mansion. Silas looks ready to collapse, and you smell like a wet dog dipped in bubblegum." Kaylin wanted to argue. The wolf inside him demanded he sleep on the floorboards of the van to guard her tools. But the rational side of his brain recognized the exhaustion etching lines into his beta's face in the trailing town car. "I will return tomorrow," Kaylin rumbled. He uncoiled his massive frame from the cracked vinyl seat. "Keep your doors locked, Mackenzie. You embarrassed a noble today. Lycan pride demands retribution." "Let them come," Leo called from the back cargo area, waving his phone. "I recorded the whole pepper spray incident. One wrong move, and Corvin's weeping face goes on every social media platform on the internet. Cyber warfare." Kaylin stepped out, the rusted hinges groaning. He watched the van drive away before climbing into the back of Silas's town car. They arrived at the Blackwood estate an hour later. The grand foyer offered no peace. 3 stretch limousines sat parked on the crushed gravel driveway, their engines ticking in the evening chill. Silas let out a ragged sigh, gripping the steering wheel. "The High Council," Silas muttered, his voice a dry rasp. "News travels fast. Corvin's humiliation reached the elders." Kaylin stepped out of the vehicle, his molten gold eyes hardened. He strode up the stone steps, ignoring the heavy oak doors, and pushed them open. 3 elderly Lycans stood in the center of the grand hall. They wore sweeping cloaks of dark wool and tailored suits beneath. Elder Vane, a man with silver hair and a face carved from granite, sneered as Kaylin approached. Elder Thorne, a hulking brute with a scarred jaw, crossed his arms. "You reek of human chemicals and rodent fur," Vane announced, his nose wrinkled in disgust. "The king of the Blackwoods playing domestic servant in a rust bucket. Corvin claims a human woman struck him down with poison while you stood by." "Corvin challenged my authority on a public street," Kaylin countered. He stripped the ruined, hair-covered charcoal jacket from his shoulders and tossed it onto a velvet chair. He unbuttoned his cuffs, exposing thick, scarred forearms. "The human neutralized him before I had to snap his neck. She saved us an incident report with the local authorities." "She is a human," Thorne growled, stepping forward. "Our laws require a Luna of pure blood, a Lycan bride to secure the alliances. You parade a feral mortal around our borders. She insults our traditions. You will discard her, Kaylin. Choose a proper mate from the noble houses, or the council will call a vote of no confidence." Kaylin stopped unbuttoning his sleeves. He let the beast rise, projecting a wave of lethal, suffocating dominance across the room. The 3 elders stiffened. Their inner wolves whined, recognizing the apex predator in the room. "She is my mate," Kaylin declared, his voice dropping to a gravelly, chest-rattling octave. "I do not care about your votes. I do not care about your noble houses." Vane swallowed hard, forcing a diplomatic mask over his fear. "If she is your mate, prove she understands our ways. We host the Equinox banquet tonight in this very hall. Bring her. Let the court see this brilliant human. If she survives the social scrutiny, we will pause our judgment." Kaylin knew a trap. The council intended to humiliate Mack, to break her spirit with supernatural elitism. He almost laughed. They had no idea what kind of monster they invited to dinner. Chapter 14. Mack stood in the cargo area of the van, counting bottles of tearless shampoo, when her burner phone buzzed. She answered, balancing the phone between her ear and shoulder. "Pause and reflect. We charge double for after-hours skunking," Mack recited. "Mackenzie." Kaylin's deep voice vibrated through the cheap speaker. "I require your presence at the estate. The High Council demands you attend the Equinox banquet tonight." Mack paused, a bottle of blue barbicide in her hand. A banquet? Does this involve grooming duties? Because my shears need sharpening. It involves eating, Kaylin replied, and politics. The elders wish to test you. They expect you to fail. Dinner is outside my contractual obligations, Mack stated. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper on her clipboard. If you want me there, I am billing you my premium consultation rate, $300 an hour, plus a meal per diem. I will authorize a direct transfer from the Blackwood Treasury, Kaylin agreed without a second of hesitation. Bring your brother. He amuses my wolf. 2 hours later, the rusted van parked beside the stretch limousines in the Blackwood driveway. Mack stepped out wearing black slacks, a practical button-down shirt, and sensible boots. She brought her clipboard. Leo walked beside her, wearing a thrift store blazer that smelled faintly of mothballs. He clutched his phone like a lifeline. They entered the grand hall. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over a massive mahogany dining table. The claw gouges on the hardwood floors remained visible, a stark reminder of the violence lurking beneath the luxury. Dozens of Lycan nobles milled around, wearing silk gowns and bespoke tuxedos. They stopped talking the moment Mack walked in. Amber and gold eyes locked onto the humans. The air grew thick with tension. Kaylin stepped through the crowd. He wore a fresh, midnight black suit. He moved toward Mack, positioning his massive frame to shield her blind spots. His golden eyes swept the room, daring anyone to step forward. The table is set, Silas announced from the corner, his voice echoing over the silent crowd. The beta looked even worse than yesterday, nursing a fresh cup of coffee in a ceramic mug. Mack led the way to the table. She noticed the details immediately. The place settings utilized heavy gold plates and polished steel flatware. Zero silver. A biological necessity, not a stylistic choice. Leo dropped into a chair next to Elder Vane. The silver-haired Lycan shot Leo a look of pure, unadulterated venom. So, Leo started, grabbing a thick slice of rare roast beef with his steel fork. He piled it onto his gold plate. You guys call yourselves a pack, the Blackwood Pack. Is that an incorporated entity? An LLC? Vane blinked, his sneer faltering. We are a bloodline, an ancient sovereignty. Right, but how do you file your taxes? Leo chewed the beef, pointing his fork at the elder. If you classify as a religious organization or a fraternal society, you qualify for a 501c3 tax exemption. The property taxes on this mansion must be brutal. Do you write off the raw meat as a business expense? Vane stared at Leo, profound confusion replacing his anger. We hoard gold in vaults. Rookie mistake, Leo admonished, shaking his head. Inflation eats stagnant wealth. You need diversified index funds. I can run an audit for a 10% cut. Down the table, Mack ignored the roasted game hens and pulled out her pen. She treated the banquet hall like a massive open-air kennel. She tracked eye movements, ear twitches, and postural shifts. The nobles operated on a strict, fear-based hierarchy. The weaker wolves kept their heads bowed, exposing their necks to the alphas. It was primitive. It was inefficient. A tall Lycan woman with raven hair and a dress the color of fresh blood stood up from her chair. Lady Celine. She carried a crystal wine glass, her amber eyes locking onto Mack. The chatter in the hall died instantly. The true test had begun. Chapter 15. Lady Celine moved around the mahogany table with the liquid grace of a hunting cat. She stopped directly behind Mack's chair. The rest of the pack watched in breathless anticipation. Celine held the rank of an alpha female in the Southern Territories. She ruled through intimidation and raw physical power. Celine leaned down, her face inches from Mack's ear. You do not belong here, human. You lack fangs. You lack speed. You are a fragile, fleeting thing. When the king tires of your novelty, you will be nothing but a forgotten scent in the dirt. Kaylin's hands gripped the edge of the mahogany table. The wood cracked under his fingers. He prepared to stand, ready to throw Celine through a stained glass window. Mack raised a hand, stopping Kaylin in his tracks. She did not turn around. She did not flinch. She set her steel fork down on her gold plate, unclipped the pen from her shirt pocket, and picked up her clipboard. "Fascinating," Mack murmured, loud enough for the silent hall to hear. She turned her chair, facing the Lycan noblewoman. She clicked her pen. "Excuse me?" Celine snarled, her upper lip curling to expose sharp canines. "Your dominance display," Mack clarified, writing a note on her pad. "It reeks of extreme insecurity. You approach from the rear, invading personal space to force a flinch response. It is a classic resource-guarding behavior. You view the king as a resource, and my presence threatens your perceived access." Celine stiffened. Her amber eyes widened. No one spoke to an alpha female like this. "I am a predator. You are prey." "You are a textbook case of elevated cortisol," Mack corrected. She tapped her pen against the clipboard, using it as a pointer. She gestured to the Lycans sitting at Celine's end of the table. "Look at your subordinates. Their shoulders slump, their breathing is shallow. You rule through fear and physical threat. In canine behavioral science, we call this the alpha role myth." A murmur rippled through the hall. Elder Thorne gripped his wineglass, his knuckles turning white. "You rely on punishment to maintain order," Mack continued, her voice echoing with clinical, detached authority. "Punishment does not teach loyalty. It teaches avoidance. Your pack does not respect you, Celine. They tolerate you to avoid pain. The moment a stronger physical threat appears, your entire hierarchy will collapse because it lacks a foundation of mutual trust." Celine's face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The sheer logic of the human's argument stripped away her mystical, terrifying aura. "Furthermore," Mack added, glancing down at her notes, "your reliance on posturing wastes massive amounts of caloric energy. True apex leaders do not need to announce their presence or threaten guests at a dinner table. They lead by managing the environment." Mack clicked her pen shut and slid the clipboard back onto the table. She looked Celine dead in the eyes. "You are not a predator right now," Mack diagnosed. "You are an anxious, poorly socialized animal acting out due to environmental stress. I recommend a heavy dose of structure, predictable routines, and perhaps a puzzle toy to stimulate your brain." Silence smothered the grand hall. The Lycan nobles stared at Mack, their jaws slack. Inside Kaylin's mind, the beast threw its head back and unleashed a mental howl of pure, unadulterated worship. Mate crushed the raven female with words. Mate is the supreme alpha. Celine's hand trembled. The wine in her crystal glass sloshed over the rim, staining her fingers red. Stripped of her intimidation, she had no counterattack. She spun on her heel, her silk dress whipping around her ankles, and fled the banquet hall. Leo took another bite of his roast beef. He pointed his steel fork at Elder Vane. "Like I said, you guys need an HR department. The liability here is staggering." Chapter 16. Kaylin did not try to hide his absolute elation. He stood up from his chair, radiating a wave of golden, suffocating power that pinned the remaining nobles to their seats. He offered his hand to Mack. "Our consultation concludes," Kaylin announced to the silent room. Mack took his hand. His skin felt burning hot, the ancient magic thrumming just beneath the surface. She stood, grabbed her clipboard, and adjusted her practical button-down shirt. "Billable hours end when we reach the van, Leo. Wrap up the tax audit." Leo shoved a final dinner roll into his blazer pocket, gave Elder Vane a crisp salute, and followed his sister out of the grand hall. Kaylin escorted them to the crushed gravel driveway. The cool night air felt like a balm after the stifling tension of the banquet. Silas stood by the stretch limousines, holding his empty coffee mug, looking at the departing humans with a newfound, terrified respect. "You performed beyond expectation," Kaylin rumbled, his molten gold eyes locked onto Mack's face. "The beast demands I build you a throne." "Tell the beast I prefer a functional suspension for the van," Mack replied. She climbed into the driver's seat, tossing the clipboard onto the dashboard. "Keep your pack in line, Kaylin. I will return tomorrow for the scheduled perimeter guard duty." She started the engine. It squealed, rattling the rusted frame, and the van rolled down the twisted oak driveway into the darkness. Back inside the estate, the silence in the banquet hall shattered into furious whispers. Elder Vane pushed his heavy chair back. He caught the eye of Elder Thorne. Without a word, the two ancient Lycans slipped away from the mahogany table, retreating down a shadowy corridor to a private, soundproof study. Thorne slammed the heavy door shut and locked the iron deadbolt. A disaster. The human humiliated a territorial alpha using nothing but paper and a sharp tongue. The younger nobles are whispering. They question our ways. Vane paced the length of the study, his silver hair catching the dim light of a desk lamp. He looked at the deep claw marks gouged into the baseboards. "The king is compromised," Vane stated, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "The mate bond blinds him. He believes she is an asset, but she is a contagion." "She carries no weapons," Thorne grunted, crossing his massive arms. "She uses no magic." "That makes her more dangerous," Vane snapped. He stopped pacing. "Our society stands on a pillar of strength, fear, and blood. We rule because we are the apex predators. That human dismantles our authority with logic. If the pack realizes they do not need to fear the alphas, the High Council loses control. The old ways die." Thorne's scarred jaw tightened. The digital clock on the plastic dashboard glowed a faint green. 2:14 a.m. She held her clinical clipboard in one hand, using her pen to tick off the supply inventory. 3 bottles of tearless berry shampoo, 2 gallons of industrial de-skunking fluid, 4 sets of titanium trimmers. Business required order, especially when billing a supernatural treasury $300 an hour. Inside the small rental house 30 feet away, a warm yellow light spilled from the kitchen window. Leo sat at the Formica table, tapping on his tablet screen and chewing the stolen banquet dinner roll. He remained oblivious to the outside world, buried in tax codes and index fund projections. Mack tapped her pen against the metal shelving. She paused. The suburban night felt wrong. The usual hum of cicadas vanished. The neighborhood stray cats that normally raided the trash bins were nowhere in sight. The wind died, leaving a suffocating stillness. She understood environmental shifts. Silence in an active ecosystem signaled the arrival of an apex predator. The smaller animals fled the hunting ground. Mack set the clipboard onto the grooming table. She walked to the back cargo doors and peered out the reinforced glass window. Shadows detached from the tree line at the edge of the property. 4 massive shapes slunk onto the cracked concrete driveway. They did not move with the clumsy, arrogant bluster of Lord Corvin. They kept their bellies low, their footfalls silent. Rogues. The High Council's silent guard. They sported coats of mottled gray, ash, and dirt brown. Their amber eyes locked onto the rusted grooming van. Mack did not scream. She did not sprint toward the house to warn Leo. Running triggered the canine chase response. A human could never outpace a Lycan over 30 feet of open ground. The rogues wanted her to flee. They wanted to drag her into the dark woods, leaving the driveway clean of blood and evidence. She reached up and threw the heavy steel deadbolt on the cargo doors. The mechanism locked with a solid metallic chunk. The sound echoed across the quiet driveway. The 4 wolves froze. The element of surprise evaporated. They realized the prey knew they were there. The largest rogue, an ash-colored brute missing half his left ear, rose from his stalking crouch. He bared his fangs. A vibrating growl rattled the loose titanium combs on Mack's workstation. "Okay," Mack whispered. She backed away from the glass. She stepped into the driver's cabin and locked the side doors. "You want to hunt a groomer? Let us evaluate the arsenal." The van boasted reinforced steel paneling, installed by the previous owner who specialized in grooming volatile police canine units. The glass was thick, tempered safety glass. However, the suspension groaned under daily use, and the rusted hinges would not hold against 1,200 pounds of supernatural muscle forever. The ash-colored wolf lunged. He slammed his shoulder into the passenger door. The van rocked hard on its bad shocks. Metal screeched. The passenger side mirror snapped off, shattering on the concrete. Mack grabbed a roll of heavy-duty gray duct tape from the console. She taped her heavy-duty Maglite flashlight to a metal grooming pole, creating a makeshift spotlight. She flicked the switch, blasting the beam directly into the ash-colored wolf's face through the side window. The brute recoiled, snapping his jaws at the harsh glare. He squeezed his eyes shut, whining. Mack wedged the flashlight pole between the seats to keep the beam steady, just as another wolf jumped onto the hood. "Photophobia," Mack noted aloud. Her brain slipped into clinical overdrive, building a wall of logic to cage her rising panic. Dilated pupils adjusted for night vision. Sudden lumen exposure causes temporary retinal spasms. The metal of the hood buckled under the new beast's weight. Claws gouged deep trenches into the fading white paint. The rogue pressed its snout to the windshield, snapping its jaws, spraying thick saliva across the glass. Mack reached beneath the grooming sink. She dragged out the heavy, 2-gallon plastic jug of industrial de-skunking formula. She needed a delivery system. The van featured an exterior hydro-wash port system. The previous owner installed external nozzles above the side doors and rear bumper to hose down mud-caked farm dogs before allowing them inside the cabin. The system connected to the internal pressurized water tank and the chemical mixing reservoir. Mack unscrewed the cap of the de-skunker jug. A potent chemical stench filled the small cabin. The formula utilized a stabilized hydrogen peroxide and baking soda suspension engineered specifically to break down the sulfur-based thiols found in skunk spray. It oxidized organic compounds on contact. To a human nose, it smelled like concentrated bleach mixed with burning plastic. To a Lycan with olfactory nerves 10,000 times more sensitive than a bloodhound, it functioned as absolute chemical warfare. Mack poured the entire 2 gallons into the hydro-wash mixing reservoir. She locked the reservoir cap. She primed the water pump. The generator hummed to life, vibrating the floorboards. Outside, the 4 wolves gathered around the van. They abandoned stealth. They began tearing at the door handles, their claws sparking against the steel. Mack placed her hand on the exterior wash-release valve. She watched the ash-colored wolf bare his teeth at the reinforced glass. "Bath time," Mack declared. Chapter 18. The rusted van shuddered as the 4 rogue Lycans tore at the exterior. Their massive claws shredded the weather stripping around the windows. The tempered glass bowed inward under the pressure of their combined weight. Deep, guttural snarls vibrated through the steel frame, a sound designed by nature to paralyze prey. Mack kept her hand gripped tight around the brass release valve of the hydro-wash system. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady. She tracked their movements through the saliva-streaked windows. She needed maximum coverage. She needed them clustered. The wolf on the hood slid down, joining the ash-colored leader and a 3rd rogue at the passenger side door. They wedged their claws into the door seam, prying the metal backward. The rusted hinges shrieked, threatening to snap. The 4th wolf paced the rear cargo doors, snapping its jaws at the steel deadbolt. 3 on the right flank, 1 in the rear, Mack calculated. The internal pressure gauge for the water tank hit the red zone. The hydrogen peroxide and baking soda solution churned inside the reservoir, creating a thick, oxygen-rich foam. The passenger door gaped open a full inch. The ash-colored wolf shoved his massive snout into the crack, his amber eyes burning with predatory triumph. Mack threw the brass valve open. The van's external nozzles erupted. High-pressure jets blasted outward in a 360-degree arc. The industrial de-skunking foam hit the rogues with the force of a fire hose. The ash-colored leader took a direct hit to the face. The thick, chemical-laden foam coated his snout, eyes, and ears. The effect proved instantaneous and devastating. The hydrogen peroxide oxidized upon contact with the Lycan's hypersensitive mucous membranes. To the rogues, the sensation mirrored inhaling pure, burning acid. The chemical stench overpowered their delicate olfactory nerves, short-circuiting their brains. The leader tore his snout out of the door seam. He collapsed onto the driveway, letting out a high-pitched, agonizing shriek. He clawed at his own face, smearing the burning foam deeper into his fur. The other two wolves on the flank took the blast across their chests and heads. They stumbled backward, gagging and retching. The intense sensory overload stripped away their coordination. One wolf crashed into Leo's trash cans, sending plastic bins and garbage scattering across the lawn. The beast thrashed on the ground in a fit of sneezes, a thick trail of foam dripping from its jaws. At the rear of the van, the fourth wolf tried to leap away, but the wide-angle nozzle caught its hindquarters. The chemical stench enveloped it. The wolf spun in circles, biting at its own tail in a desperate attempt to rid itself of the blinding odor. Inside the van, Mack shut off the valve. The pump ground to a halt. Silence returned to the driveway, broken only by the pathetic whimpers and sneezes of the incapacitated assassins. The area looked like a bizarre winter wonderland. White, bubbling foam covered the concrete, the bushes, and the four massive, writhing bodies. Mack unhooked her titanium trimmers from the workstation and slipped them into her apron pocket, just in case. She walked to the driver's side window and looked out at the carnage. The front door of the rental house slammed open. Leo stood on the porch, his thrift store blazer discarded. He clutched his heavy metal wrench in one hand and his phone in the other. He stared at the giant, foam-covered wolves rolling on his driveway. "Mack!" Leo yelled, keeping a safe distance from the thrashing monsters. "Are you okay? I smelled bleach and heard screaming." "I am uninjured," Mack called back through the cracked driver's window. "Stay on the porch, Leo. They are experiencing severe acute sensory distress. Do not approach them." Leo raised his phone, hitting the record button. "This is going in the liability folder. I am billing the High Council for property damage and landscaping. Look at my azaleas. They are crushed." The ash-colored leader managed to push himself up onto his front paws. His eyes streamed with tears, squeezed shut against the chemical burn. He let out a wet, weak growl, his chest heaving as he tried to purge the caustic scent from his lungs. He remained blind, deafened by his own sneezing, and stripped of his pack coordination. He took a wobbly step toward the van, operating on pure, stubborn malice. Mack reached for her canister of pet-safe pepper spray, preparing for round 2. Before the ash-colored wolf could take another step, a sound shattered the night. It was not a howl. It was a roar of pure, earth-shattering rage that rattled the teeth in Mack's skull. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient magic. A massive shadow launched from the tree line. It cleared the 30-foot lawn in a single, impossible bound, landing directly on top of the ash-colored leader. Chapter 19. The impact cracked the concrete driveway. The massive shadow pinned the ash-colored rogue to the ground, crushing the breath from its lungs. Kalen did not arrive in his tailored midnight black suit. He arrived as the king of the Blackwoods. His wolf form dwarfed the council's assassins. He weighed well over 350 pounds, a prehistoric nightmare of coarse, midnight-colored fur and corded muscle. His heavy forelegs planted firmly on the rogue's chest. His molten gold eyes burned through the darkness, radiating an aura of lethal, suffocating dominance. Back at the estate, Kalen felt the sharp spike of Mack's adrenaline through the mate bond. The terror tasted like cold iron in the back of his throat. He did not wait for Silas. He did not grab the keys to the town car. He shredded his suit, shifted mid-stride, and ran the miles between the Gothic mansion and the suburbs. Fueled entirely by ancient magic, the massive wolf covered the impossible distance in a fraction of the time a vehicle would take, driven by a feral, all-consuming need to protect his claim. The beast in his head demanded a massacre. Kalen sank his fangs into the ash-colored rogue's shoulder. The crunch of bone echoed over the whimpers of the other wolves. He did not tear the limb off, but he applied enough pressure to ensure the assassin would never walk without a limp again. He tossed the rogue aside like a broken toy. The leader hit the side of the rusted van and crumpled into a whimpering heap of soapy fur. The other 3 rogues, still blinded and gagging from the de-skunking foam, tried to scramble away. Their instincts screamed at them to submit, to bare their throats to the apex predator. But the king did not want their submission. He wanted their lives. Kalen stalked toward the wolf thrashing in Leo's ruined azalea bushes. He lowered his massive head, his jaws parting to expose teeth the size of hunting knives. A low, continuous rumble vibrated in his chest, a promise of absolute destruction. Inside the van, Mack watched the primal display. The clinical box in her mind analyzed the situation with cold precision. The High Council sent these rogues. Elders Vane and Thorn orchestrated the ambush. If Kalen murdered the assassins on a suburban driveway, he violated the ancient laws of challenge. The council would label him a feral, rogue king. They would use the slaughter to justify a coup. A Lycan civil war would tear the territory apart, spilling supernatural blood into the human world. Kalen's reign would end, and the traditionalists would hunt Mack until she died. Mack could not allow the beast to make a tactical error. "Leo!" Mack shouted through the cracked window. "Get inside the house and lock the door. Now!" Leo did not argue. He stopped recording, spun on his heel, and sprinted into the house, slamming the deadbolt shut. Kalen pinned the second wolf to the grass. He opened his jaws, aiming directly for the rogue's exposed throat. The kill strike required a fraction of a second. Mack unlocked the driver's side door. The metal groaned in protest. She pushed it open and stepped out onto the foam-covered concrete. Her sensible boots slipped slightly on the slip chemicals. She ignored the burning stench of the de-skunker. She stood in the open, vulnerable, lacking fangs, claws, or magic. She possessed only her intellect and her absolute authority. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs, drawing upon years of managing massive, unpredictable animals. She did not use a pleading tone. She did not scream in panic. She projected her voice from her diaphragm, delivering a booming, professional command that cut through the haze of bloodlust. "Kalen!" Mack barked. The massive midnight wolf froze. His jaws hovered an inch from the rogue's jugular. His ears flicked backward, swiveling toward the sound of her voice. "Leave it," Mack commanded, pointing a rigid finger at the ground. The beast warred with the man inside Kalen's mind. The feral instinct screamed to finish the kill, to bathe in the blood of the threat. But the mate bond, anchored by his profound respect for Mack's dominance, pulled at his consciousness. She did not cower, she ordered him. Kalen turned his massive head, his molten gold eyes locked onto Mack. He let out a defiant, chest-rattling snarl, challenging her directive. Mack did not flinch. She took a deliberate step forward, entering his strike zone. Mack crossed her arms over her practical button-down shirt. She held his gaze, refusing to drop her eyes. In the language of predators, breaking eye contact signaled submission. She remained the immovable object in his path. "I said leave it," Mack repeated, dropping her tone to a hard, unforgiving octave. "Do not ruin my driveway." Chapter 20. The standoff stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. The night air hung thick with tension, the scent of damp earth battling the chemical reek of the de-skunking foam. The surviving rogues lay motionless, too terrified of the king to even whimper. Kalen stared at the tiny human woman in the black slacks. His chest heaved. The beast thrashed against the confines of his skull, demanding violence. "Kill," the ancient instinct roared. Protect mate! Shed blood! Mack tapped her foot against the concrete. I am waiting. The sheer absurdity of her impatience struck the beast like a physical blow. She stood surrounded by crushed metal, broken glass, and supernatural assassins, annoyed that he took too long to follow a directive. The feral haze began to crack. A strange, twisted affection welled up inside the massive wolf. Mate commands, the beast conceded, the bloodlust fading into an overwhelming urge to please her. Obey mate. Kalen slowly released his grip on the rogue. He stepped off the cowering wolf, his massive paws padding silently across the ruined azaleas. He walked toward Mack, his head lowering in a clear display of deference. When he reached the van, he stopped. He let out a soft, rumbling whine that sounded jarringly out of place coming from a prehistoric monster. Sit, Mack ordered, pointing at the concrete. The king of the Blackwood Pack, the most lethal apex predator in the territory, dropped onto his haunches. He sat amidst the bubbling white foam, looking up at Mack with wide, golden eyes. Mack let out a slow, steady breath. She reached out and rested her hand firmly on top of his broad, coarse head. She did not pet him. She provided a grounding physical contact, reinforcing the calm state. Good boy. Headlights swept across the suburban street. A black town car screeched around the corner, taking the turn far too fast. It slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt behind the pause and reflect van. Silas threw the driver's door open. The exhausted Beta stumbled out, clutching a set of heavy iron cuffs. He wore his suit trousers and a wrinkled undershirt, having abandoned his jacket in the rush. He took one look at the scene, the dented van, the foam-covered assassins, and his terrifying king sitting at attention for a human groomer, and leaned against the car door. I leave for 20 minutes, Silas breathed, rubbing his temples. 20 minutes! Your council sent a hit squad, Mack informed him, her clinical detachment returning full force. They lack basic tactical awareness. They tried to breach a reinforced vehicle from the flank instead of disabling the tires. Silas surveyed the groaning, sneezing rogues. Elder Vane's silent guard. He broke the ancient pact. He tried to execute a mate. Independent contractor, Mack corrected automatically. Kalen let out a huff of breath, his tail thumping once against the side of the van. Whatever you are, Silas muttered, pulling a radio from his belt. He barked a series of codes into the device, summoning the loyalist pack guards. This is treason. The elders overplayed their hand. We have the evidence to purge the council. Leo has the video footage, Mack added. Make sure you get his billing information. We charge an extraction fee for hazardous waste removal. Within 10 minutes, 3 unmarked black SUVs arrived. Loyalists, answering only to Kalen, swarmed the property. They hauled the soapy, crying rogues from the bushes on the driveway, binding them in heavy chains. They worked in dead silence, casting terrified glances toward the massive midnight wolf still sitting next to the human woman. Silas approached Mack, giving Kalen a wide berth. The prisoners go to the estate vaults. Kalen, he needs to shift back. The longer he stays in that form, the harder it is to pull the man back to the surface. Mack looked down at Kalen. The golden eyes watched her every move. Go home, Silas, Mack instructed. Process the prisoners. I will manage the king. Silas nodded, bowing his head respectfully to Mack before climbing into the town car. The SUVs rolled out, taking the assassins back to the Gothic estate. Silence returned to the driveway. The chemical foam began to dissolve into soapy puddles. Mack crossed her arms, looking at the massive wolf. You ruined your suit. Again. Kalen stood up. He stepped closer, burying his massive snout into her shoulder, inhaling her scent. The vanilla and coconut grounded him. The transformations shuddered through his massive frame. Bones snapped and realigned. Fur melted into skin. Mack closed her eyes, turning her head away to give him a shred of dignity as the wolf vanished, leaving the stark, naked, scarred king kneeling on the wet concrete. Chapter 21. The caustic stench of industrial de-skunker hung thick in the humid night air, masking the scent of pine and damp earth. Mack stood on the cracked concrete of her driveway. She stared at the naked king of the Blackwood pack kneeling at her feet. The adrenaline, which kept her spine rigid and her voice commanding, began a rapid retreat. Her hands developed a faint, uncontrollable tremor. She turned her back to him, granting him the privacy the beast did not care about. She walked to the ruined Pause and Reflect van. The passenger mirror lay shattered on the asphalt. Deep, silver gouges marred the white hood. She reached through the open driver's door and grabbed a spare fleece blanket she kept tucked behind the passenger seat. Mack walked back and tossed the folded fleece over Kaylin's broad, scarred shoulders. "Put that on," Mack instructed. Her voice lacked its usual booming authority. It sounded thin, human. Kaylin stood. He pulled the blue fleece tightly around his shoulders like a heavy cloak, gripping the edges with precise, deliberate movements. He looked at the cracked concrete, the crushed azaleas, and the dissolving puddles of chemical foam. The reality of the ambush settled over his features. The High Council sent assassins to her doorstep. They brought the supernatural war to a suburban rental house. Leo pushed the front door open. He stepped onto the porch, clutching his heavy metal wrench. He stared at the naked billionaire wearing a dog hair-covered blanket. "I am billing the pack for the landscaping," Leo announced, his voice cracking. "And the driveway, and the emotional trauma." "Put the cost on the spreadsheet, Leo," Mack said. She rubbed her temples. A vicious headache bloomed behind her eyes. "Lock the doors. I need to take the king back to his estate. The loyalists took his transport." "Take the van," Leo offered, pointing the wrench at the battered vehicle. "The suspension sounds like a dying whale, but the engine runs." Mack nodded. She gestured toward the passenger seat. Kaylin did not argue. He folded his massive frame into the cracked vinyl seat, yanking the bent and damaged passenger door shut with a violent screech of protesting metal. He pulled the fleece tight. Mack climbed behind the wheel. The engine protested, coughing a cloud of exhaust before settling into a rough idle. The drive to the Gothic estate passed in suffocating silence. The rusted van limped down the mountain roads. The headlights illuminated the twisted oak driveway, revealing the imposing stone mansion looming in the darkness. Mack parked near the grand stone steps. They walked through the heavy oak front doors. The grand foyer remained empty. Silas and the loyalist guards occupied the dungeons, securing the treasonous elders and the foam-covered assassins. Kaylin bypassed the main corridors, leading Mack up a sweeping mahogany staircase to the west wing. His private chambers matched his human persona, stark, vast, and devoid of unnecessary warmth. A massive four-poster bed dominated the room. Charcoal drapes framed floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dense forest. Kaylin stopped in the center of the room. The distance between them felt like a physical chasm. The beast in his mind whined, pacing invisible circles, terrified by her silence. "Mate is quiet. Mate hates the blood. Fix it." "They targeted you to break me," Kaylin stated, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He stared at the hardwood floor. "My pack brought monsters to your home. You should have let me tear their throats out. You should run from this." Mack unclipped the pet-safe pepper spray from her belt pouch. She set it on a heavy oak dresser with a definitive click. She unbuttoned the cuffs of her practical shirt and rolled the sleeves up to her elbows. "I do not run," Mack said. She walked across the room, stopping inches from his chest. She looked up, forcing him to meet her gaze. The molten gold in his eyes looked fractured, swirling with an ancient, found fear. The king, who commanded armies and terrified nobles, feared a human woman walking away. "My clinical detachment is a defense mechanism," Mack confessed, the words tasting like ash. "When I feel terrified, I build a wall of data. I diagnosed the threat to shrink it down to a manageable size. I ordered you to sit because I knew a public slaughter would ruin your reign. I cataloged the chemical reactions to stop myself from screaming." Kalen's breath hitched. He reached out, his massive, calloused fingers hovering millimeters from her cheek. He refused to close the distance, terrified his raw strength might shatter her. Mack closed the gap. She pressed her palm flat against the center of his chest, right over his hammering heart. The heat radiating from his skin burned through the thin fabric of her shirt. "I am not a fragile thing," Mack promised, her voice steadying. "I survived the ambush. I managed the threat. I managed you. Do not insult my competence by telling me to run." The beast let out a mental howl of pure adoration. The man followed suit. Kalen dropped his forehead to hers, closing his eyes, letting the crushing weight of his isolation shatter into 1,000 pieces. Chapter 22. The silence in the king's chambers transformed. It lost the suffocating tension of the ambush, replacing it with a heavy, magnetic pull. Kalen's hands, scarred from centuries of combat, finally rested on Mack's shoulders. His touch held a reverence reserved for sacred relics. "Mine," the ancient wolf purred in the back of his skull, a sound vibrating through his vocal cords. "Mate stays. Claim mate." "The beast demands a conclusion," Kalen murmured, his breath warm against her temple. He traced the line of her jaw, mapping the pulse hammering beneath her skin. "The bond remains incomplete. The ancient magic requires a physical tether to anchor the soul." Mack understood the biology of supernatural bonds. Her rational mind spent hours detailing the pheromone pathways and the neurological rewiring necessary to sustain a Lycan mate link. But standing in the dim light of the Gothic estate, surrounded by the scent of pine and raw power, the science felt irrelevant. The data meant nothing against the inferno burning in his molten gold eyes. "I do not submit to alpha posturing," Mack reminded him. Her hands slid up his chest, gripping the edge of the blue fleece blanket draped over his shoulders. "You bow to no one," Kalen swore, the gravel in his voice deepening. "You are the supreme alpha. My wolf bows to you." He bent down, capturing her mouth in a kiss that tasted of desperation and dark magic. The restraint he held broke, shattering like cheap glass. Kalen pulled her flush against his massive frame. The sheer physical difference between them, his 300-pound muscle mass against her practical human form, should have invoked terror. Instead, it provided an anchor. Mack kissed him back, matching his intensity. She shoved the fleece blanket from his shoulders. It pooled on the hardwood floor. The claiming process of a Lycan king involved zero gentleness. It demanded raw, instinctual honesty. Kalen lifted her off her feet, carrying her across the room to the massive four-poster bed. He followed her down into the heavy charcoal blankets. The heat radiating from his skin rivaled a furnace. Mack felt the ancient magic thrumming in his veins, a kinetic energy seeking a conduit. He worshipped the lines of her collarbone, his fangs grazing the delicate skin of her neck. He did not break the skin to mark her like a primitive beast. He let the magic seep into her pores, binding their life forces together through sheer, undeniable will. Every touch rewired her nervous system. She felt his profound relief, his feral possessiveness, and the unwavering loyalty of the beast. The sensory overload bypassed her analytical brain. She stopped cataloging the physiological responses and surrendered to the overwhelming tide of the bond. Hours dissolved into the shadows. Dawn broke over the Blackwood estate, painting the tall windows in shades of bruised purple and gold. Mack lay tangled in the dark sheets. The steady, rhythmic thud of Kalen's heart served as a metronome against her cheek. One of his heavy, muscular arms draped over her waist, pinning her to the mattress in a gesture of absolute possessive protection. She opened her eyes. She felt different. The air in the room carried new textures. She could hear the faint scuff of boots in the hallway 3 floors down. The bond sharpened her human senses, pulling her a fraction of an inch into his supernatural world. Kalen stirred. His golden eyes opened, devoid of the feral edge that haunted him the day prior. He looked at her, his expression softening into a look of absolute peace. "Mate," the beast whispered in her own mind. Mack blinked. She pushed herself up on one elbow, staring at Kalen's chest. "Did your wolf just talk to me?" A slow, devastating smirk spread across Kalen's face. He pulled her back down against his chest, burying his face in her hair. "The bond shares everything," Kalen rumbled, his chest vibrating with a deep chuckle. "He likes you more than he likes me. He considers you the pack leader now." "Excellent," Mack stated, a clinical edge returning to her voice. She tapped her finger against his collarbone. "Because I have a massive structural reorganization planned for this pack. Tell your beta to summon the remaining council members to the Grand Hall at noon. We have an HR meeting." Chapter 23. The Grand Hall of the Blackwood estate smelled of nervous sweat and stale fear. The crystal chandeliers cast a harsh midday glare over the massive mahogany table. 8 Lycan elders sat rigid in their high-backed chairs. Elder Vane and Elder Thorn remained absent, currently occupying reinforced iron cells in the sub-basement dungeons, awaiting trial for treason. Silas stood near the head of the table. He wore a fresh suit and held a ceramic mug of black coffee. A faint glimmer of hope danced in his exhausted eyes. The heavy oak doors swung open. Mack strode into the room. She did not wear a blood-red silk gown or a crown of bones. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer, crisp black slacks, and her sensible work boots. The mate bond radiated from her skin, a heavy, suffocating wave of alpha authority that forced the ancient wolves to lower their gazes. Kalen walked a half-step behind her. He wore a bespoke suit matching her blazer. His golden eyes swept the room, daring any elder to challenge his queen. He pulled out the heavy chair at the head of the table. Mack ignored the chair. She preferred to pace. She dropped a massive 400-page black binder onto the mahogany wood. The loud thud made 2 of the elders flinch. "Good afternoon," Mack announced, her voice booming from her diaphragm. She opened the binder, flipping past dozens of color-coded tabs. "As your new Luna, I reviewed your operational infrastructure. It is a logistical nightmare. You operate a sovereign territory like a feral street gang." An elder with a scarred nose opened his mouth to protest. Kalen let out a single, low growl. The elder clamped his jaw shut. "We begin with human resources," Mack declared, pulling a pen from her pocket. She used it as a pointer, aiming at the center of the table. Clause 1. The alpha role is officially banned. Physical intimidation to resolve disputes wastes caloric energy and promotes toxic work environments. From this day forward, all territorial disputes require a mediated sit-down. Silas will distribute the conflict resolution forms. Silas pulled a stack of printed papers from his briefcase and began sliding them across the mahogany wood. The ancient werewolves stared at the standard-issue corporate forms in sheer horror. Clause 2, Mack continued, pacing the length of the table. Mandatory pack therapy. The cortisol levels in this room represent a massive cardiovascular risk. Aggression is a symptom of unchecked anxiety. I hired 3 specialized therapists. You will attend anger management seminars every Tuesday. Failure to attend results in a suspension of premium meat rations. Luna Mackenzie, a female elder began, her voice trembling. These traditions span centuries. The blood rights violate basic OSHA safety standards, Mack interrupted, slamming a hand onto the binder. You conduct unsanctioned combat on municipal property. Lord Corvin damaged a civilian vehicle 2 days ago. The pack treasury paid a small fortune to bribe the local authorities. The violence stops now. We are instituting a structured, points-based promotion system based on merit and emotional intelligence, not bite force. The council members looked at Kaelin, begging for their king to intervene, to save them from the bureaucratic nightmare unfolding before their eyes. Kaelin leaned against the back of his chair, crossing his arms. He offered a terrifying, smug smile. "The Luna speaks for the crown. Defy her paperwork and I will rip your throats out." "No throat ripping," Mack corrected without missing a beat. "We issue written warnings. 3 strikes result in exile." The elders slumped in their chairs. The realization crushed their spirits faster than any physical defeat. The human woman did not intend to rule them with claws or ancient magic. She intended to audit them, regulate them, and subject them to mandatory team-building exercises. Mack clicked her pen shut. "Review the employee handbook tonight. Tomorrow we establish the new dental plan. Dismissed." The ancient, terrifying rulers of the supernatural world grabbed their conflict resolution forms and shuffled out of the grand hall like reprimanded schoolchildren. Kaelin watched them leave, the beast in his mind howling in absolute triumph. Chapter 24. 6 months later, the subterranean vault of the Blackwood estate echoed with the sharp tapping of a stylus on glass. Leo sat behind a reinforced steel desk, wearing a tailored 3-piece suit that cost more than his entire college tuition. The faint scent of mothballs belonged to a forgotten past. He stared at a towering stack of gold doubloons, ancient chalices, and uncut gemstones. He tapped his iPad screen, shaking his head. No receipts, just piles of treasure looted during the Renaissance. The IRS would have a field day with this asset depreciation. "Silas, tell the Vanguard we need an appraiser to evaluate the crown jewels." Silas walked into the vault, holding a clipboard. The beta looked 10 years younger. With the council neutered and Mack handling the pack disputes via mediation forms, Silas finally managed to sleep 8 hours a night. "The Vanguard is busy attending their mandatory empathy workshop," Silas replied, checking a box on his clipboard. "The Luna suspended their patrol duties until they passed the emotional intelligence exam." Leo snorted, adjusting his silk tie. "Good. Tell them to bring me the tax forms when they finish." 30 miles away, the midday sun beat down on the suburban dog park. The Pause and Reflect van sat idling by the curb. It no longer rattled. The rusted shell vanished, replaced by a custom-built matte black Mercedes Sprinter. It featured run-flat bulletproof tires, a reinforced titanium chassis, and heavily tinted ballistic glass. 2 massive Lycan guards, wearing bespoke suits and earpieces, stood near the rear bumper, watching the park with hawkish intensity. Inside the climate-controlled cargo area, Mack wiped down her pristine titanium shears with a sanitized cloth. She wore a customized grooming apron over designer slacks. Business boomed. Wealthy humans loved the exclusivity, and the supernatural community considered an appointment with the Luna a mandatory display of loyalty. The rear doors swung open. Kaelin stepped into the van. He wore a crisp, midnight blue suit, radiating the quiet, lethal power of an undisputed king, and casually held a bright neon-orange rubber bone in his right hand. He looked at the gleaming stainless steel tub and the hydraulic table. "Your perimeter is secure, and I brought a peace offering," Kaelin announced, his golden eyes locking onto his mate. "The perimeter is a fenced-in dog park," Mack reminded him, clipping her shears onto her belt pouch. "The biggest threat is a rogue squirrel." Kaelin ignored the logic. The beast in his mind demanded proximity. He stepped further into the cargo area. The space, designed for 1 groomer and a dog, shrank immediately. "You are taking up valuable real estate," Mack warned, recognizing the mischief dancing in his eyes. Kaelin offered a dark, rumbling laugh. He didn't say a word. He tossed the rubber bone into the air and let the magic surge. The transformation shattered the air. The bespoke midnight blue suit shredded into useless strips of expensive wool. In a blur of impossible motion, the massive 350-pound prehistoric wolf materialized in the center of the van, his massive jaws snapping shut around the toy before it could hit the ground. His broad shoulders bumped the grooming table. His thick tail knocked a bottle of tearless shampoo into the sink. He took up the entire floor space, effectively pinning Mack against her workstation. He sat down, his head brushing the reinforced ceiling, and let out a smug, chest-rattling huff. "You are doing this on purpose," Mack sighed, crossing her arms. "You ruined another suit." The massive wolf tilted his head. His molten gold eyes gleamed with pure adoration. He opened his terrifying jaws, exposing fangs the size of hunting knives. He dropped a neon orange, crocodile-proof rubber bone directly onto her black slacks. The new Squeaky toy bounced once, letting out a sharp, high-pitched squeak. The beast pushed his massive, coarse snout against her stomach, a rumble vibrating through the steel floorboards of the van. The internal mate bond flared to life, transmitting a single demanding thought directly into her mind. "Squeak for me!" Mack picked up the rubber bone. She looked at the terrifying monster sitting obediently in her pristine mobile grooming salon. A genuine, uncontained smile broke through her clinical mask. She squeezed the toy. The absurdity of her life settled in, anchored by the ancient, unbroken bond of the Lycan king. The end.